The elevator doors opened to a gleaming lobby of glass and steel, reflecting the relentless pulse of Aurelia City. At the top of those mirrored floors sat Rothenvale Corporation, a billion-dollar empire built on innovation, ruthlessness, and the iron will of its CEO, Adrian Roth. And tucked neatly in the corner of his office, behind stacks of contracts and the soft hum of his espresso machine, sat Lena Hale, his assistant. To most, Lena was invisible. She spoke softly, dressed simply, and carried herself with a quiet precision that made her blend into the background. Her co-workers whispered that she was timid, too compliant, maybe even dull. Adrian, of course, never looked twice at her beyond barking orders. "Coffee, Hale," he would snap without looking up. "And fix the McKellen report." Again. She always did, without complaint, without fail. Yet behind her calm gaze, Lena was watching, learning, recording. Every rude comment, every unethical deal, every arrogant smirk that crossed his face became another piece of a puzzle she was putting together. Because Lena Hale wasn't her real name. 3 years ago, when her grandfather, the founder of Rothenvale, died, his will had been hidden away under a confidential clause. The board thought his only heir had vanished after a family scandal. They were wrong. She had simply stepped into the shadows. Lena took the job as an assistant under an alias, determined to see what her grandfather's empire had become. And under Adrian's reign, it had turned cold, greedy, and soulless. She remembered the old man's voice. "Power shows who you are, Lena. If you want to lead, first learn how they treat the powerless." So she did. Each morning, Lena endured Adrian's sharp tongue and the condescending laughter of the executives. Each night, she studied the company's internal systems, finding where money disappeared and how ethics were ignored. Slowly, she gathered the truth, a truth she would one day reveal. But that day wasn't meant to come so soon. It started with a board meeting gone wrong. Adrian had lost a key investor because of a personal scandal, a rumor he blamed on Lena. In front of everyone, he lashed out. "You think you're irreplaceable because you take notes and fetch coffee," he sneered. "You're nothing but a shadow here, Hale. Consider this your notice." The room went still. Lena didn't flinch. She simply took out a slim envelope from her folder and placed it on the table. "This," she said softly, "is my resignation letter." Adrian smirked. "Good. Don't let the door." "But," she continued, interrupting him for the first time, "you should read it carefully. Especially the ownership documents attached." Adrian froze, his eyes flicking to the papers as she walked away. Outside, the sun caught on the silver nameplate of the building, Rothenvale Corporation. By the time he realized what he was holding, Lena was gone. And for the first time in years, Adrian Roth didn't feel like the man in control. He felt like the one being played. Adrian stared at the letter, his pulse thrumming in his ears. The boardroom was dead silent, the only sound the rustle of paper as he flipped through the pages. The document was brief, 5 paragraphs and a notarized attachment. But its contents hit like a hammer. Lena Hale, legally known as Helena Vale, was the majority shareholder of Rothenvale Corporation. For a moment, he thought it had to be some kind of prank. But the signatures were real, his predecessors, the firm's legal seal, and a date from 3 years ago that aligned perfectly with the late founder's passing. This can't be genuine," muttered Charles, the CFO, leaning over his shoulder. But even he looked pale. "That's her name on the founding trust." Adrian rose from his chair, feeling the walls tilt around him. "Find her," he snapped. "Now." But Lena, no, Helena, was already gone. Outside, Helena walked down Aurelia's bustling streets, her calm steps betraying none of the storm within. The wind whipped strands of hair against her face as she exhaled slowly. Years of patience had led to this moment. Yet instead of triumph, she felt a strange melancholy. She hadn't wanted to humiliate Adrian. At least, not entirely. Once, she had admired him from afar, the young CEO who had rescued the company from bankruptcy with sheer audacity and cunning. But over the years, ambition had hardened him into something sharp and cruel. She'd watched him crush competitors and employees alike, all while smiling for cameras that called him the golden boy of Aurelia's corporate elite. Now, his empire was built on rotting foundations, and she held the power to either rebuild it or burn it all down. By afternoon, Adrian's office was chaos. Calls flooded in from investors demanding clarity. The board demanded an emergency meeting. And Adrian, for the first time in his career, didn't have an answer. He slammed the office door shut and threw the letter onto his desk. "Who the hell is she?" he growled. "She's the founder's granddaughter," said a hesitant voice. It was Julia, the head of legal. "Helena Vale." She disappeared after the inheritance scandal. Everyone thought she left the country. She's been here. With me. For 3 years. Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. As my assistant. Julia nodded. Apparently, yes. Adrian pressed his palms into the desk, forcing himself to think. He felt fury, disbelief, and beneath that, something else. A deep, unsettling admiration. She had played him perfectly. Every move calculated, every moment invisible until the exact second she decided to strike. It wasn't just revenge. It was strategy. That night, as the city glittered beneath the skyline, Adrian stood alone in his penthouse, looking down at the streets where Helena might be walking. He poured a glass of scotch and murmured, "You wanted me to see the truth, didn't you?" He didn't realize she was already watching from across the city, on the balcony of her grandfather's old penthouse. For the first time in years, she felt free. But freedom came with decisions. Tomorrow, the board would meet again. And she would attend, no longer as an assistant, but as the true heir. Only one question haunted her as she looked out over Aurelia City. Would she save Roth and Vale from Adrian's legacy, or destroy it along with him? The boardroom of Roth and Vale had never felt colder. The long glass table reflected the pale morning light, and every executive seated around it wore the same strained expression, confusion mixed with fear. At the head of the table sat Adrian Roth, his composure restored but his pride fractured. His usual arrogance had sharpened into something harder, control through sheer willpower. He straightened his cufflinks as the doors opened. The sound of her heels was unhurried, deliberate. Helena Vale walked in wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair swept up, her gaze level. Gone was the quiet assistant who fetched coffee. The woman standing before them commanded silence. Adrian rose automatically, as did the board members, uncertain whether it was out of habit or awe. "Good morning," Helena said, setting a folder on the table. "I believe we have business to discuss." Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. Charles, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Miss Vale, pardon, Ms. Vale. We were unaware of your majority status. Might we inquire as to your intentions?" "My intention," she replied, "is to restore what this company was meant to be. Innovation built on integrity. Not exploitation." Her gaze flicked toward Adrian. He didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You've had 3 years to observe, Ms. Vale. You've seen how we operate. You think idealism will keep this company alive. I think corruption will destroy it faster," she countered smoothly. "You've cut jobs to inflate quarterly numbers, pushed illegal overseas partnerships, and silenced whistleblowers. I have evidence of every instance." A murmur rippled through the room. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his tone remained even. "You've made your point. What now? You take the title, parade your inheritance, and think that makes you fit to lead?" Helena didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then she said quietly, "No, Adrian. I don't think I'm fit to lead. I know I am. Because I learned from you what power without conscience looks like." That one line sliced through his composure. For a second, he saw her not as the assistant he dismissed, but as the woman who had studied him, mirrored his methods, and turned them into her weapon. He felt the sting of admiration again, mixed with a sharp undercurrent of regret. Helena turned to the board. "Effective immediately, I will assume the role of interim chairwoman. Mr. Roth will retain his CEO position pending an internal audit of his practices. I'm not here to destroy this company, yet. I'm here to see if it's still worth saving." The room broke into quiet chaos, voices whispering, papers shuffling. Adrian said nothing. He just watched her. When the meeting finally ended, Helena gathered her notes and started toward the door. "Helena," Adrian said softly. It was the first time he'd used her real name. She paused but didn't turn. "You planned this perfectly," he said. "You could have ended me today. Why didn't you?" Her voice was steady, but there was something fragile beneath it. "Because endings are easy, Adrian. I want you to see what you've built before it falls apart." Then she left, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. That evening, Adrian sat in the darkened boardroom, staring at the city lights. For the first time, he didn't see Aurelia as a kingdom he ruled, but as a mirror reflecting the cost of his ambition. And somewhere across the skyline, Helena Vale poured herself a glass of wine and whispered to the night. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The next few days at Roth and Vale felt like a live wire, charged, unpredictable, ready to snap. Employees whispered as Helena Vale moved through the halls that once ignored her presence. The same people who had barely looked at Lena the assistant now stood straighter when she passed. Her nameplate gleamed outside a new office, Chairwoman Helena Vale. She didn't smile when she saw it. For all her poise, the attention felt strange, suffocating, even. She missed the anonymity of being invisible, even if it came with insult and dismissal. Power, she was realizing, came with its own kind of loneliness. Adrian noticed it too. He had spent the week watching her, quietly, from a distance, as the woman he'd underestimated restructured entire departments with surgical precision. She'd called emergency reviews of financials, reinstated ethical oversight, and quietly dissolved several of his off-the-book ventures. Every move was methodical. Every signature, deliberate. But beneath the polished control, he saw flickers of something else, hesitation, maybe even guilt. He caught her late one night in the executive lounge, sitting by the window overlooking the city. The lights of Aurelia shimmered like molten gold below. A half-empty cup of tea steamed on the table beside her. He hesitated at the doorway. Working late, Chairwoman. Her reflection met his in the glass. The company doesn't rebuild itself, Mr. Roth. Adrian, he said softly. You can call me Adrian now. She turned, arching an eyebrow. That would imply we're equals. He stepped closer, his tone edged with both irony and regret. Weren't we always? A sharp laugh escaped her. When you made me fetch your dry cleaning. When you yelled at me for mistakes I didn't make. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was confession enough. Finally, she sighed, her gaze drifting back to the skyline. You know, I used to admire you. I thought your ruthlessness came from strength. But now that I've seen behind the curtain, she looked at him directly. It was fear, wasn't it? You built walls because you didn't trust anyone. Adrian's jaw tightened. You think you figured me out after 3 years of playing spy? I think, she said quietly, I've seen enough to know you're not the villain you pretend to be. But you're not the hero either. Something in her tone unsettled him, not accusation, but empathy. And for a fleeting second, he wished she'd hated him completely. That would have been easier. You have a choice, Adrian, she continued. You can fight me, or you can fix what you broke. He studied her for a long moment. And if I choose to fight? Then you'll lose. She stood, gathering her files. But before she left, she added, you're smart enough to know I'm right. Be smarter than your pride. When she was gone, the room felt emptier than before. 2 floors below, Helena leaned against the elevator wall, her pulse unsteady. She hated that his words still affected her, that the part of her that once admired him still lingered. But she couldn't afford weakness. Not now. She thought of her grandfather's dying wish. Restore the soul of the company, Helena. Don't let greed win. Yet as she looked at Adrian, she wondered if redemption was even possible. For him, for her, or for Roth and Vale itself. The next morning, an anonymous email landed in her inbox. No name, no sender, just one line. You think you know who's corrupt? Look deeper. Attached was a file labeled, Project Seraph. Her blood ran cold. She recognized the code name. It wasn't Adrian's doing. It was something far worse. Something buried deep within the company long before either of them had power. For the first time since revealing her identity, Helena Vale felt genuine fear. The sun had barely risen when Helena stepped into her office, the mysterious file still open on her laptop. The encrypted document she'd spent all night decrypting painted a picture darker than she'd imagined. Project Seraph wasn't a project at all. It was a cover. A financial ghost trail, stretching back 5 years, hidden beneath a network of offshore subsidiaries. Funds had been funneled into private accounts under false R&D expenses. Billions. Gone. Her stomach twisted as she read the list of authorizations. Each one bore a familiar signature, but not Adrian's. It was Victor Vale. Her uncle. The man who had convinced the board to appoint Adrian as CEO after her grandfather's death. Helena leaned back, rubbing her temples. Of course. It was always Victor, the family's self-proclaimed guardian who had insisted she wasn't ready to inherit the company, who'd buried her under false scandals to seize control of the trust. And she'd walked right into his trap. Because now, the paper trail didn't just lead to Victor's network, it also led straight to her name. Someone had altered the digital signatures. If this ever went public, Helena wouldn't just lose control of Roth and Vale. She'd go down for fraud. Her phone buzzed. Adrian. She hesitated, then answered. What do you want? You need to see me, he said, voice low and urgent. Now. The elevator ride to his office was silent except for the pounding of her heart. When the doors opened, she found him already pacing, holding a printed report. You got the same email, didn't you? He said without preamble. Helena's eyes narrowed. You opened it too. Of course. You think I'd ignore a file that could bring down the company? He threw the pages on the table. Seraph isn't mine, Helena. But someone wants you to think it is. She crossed her arms. Or you're trying to get ahead of the narrative. Adrian's frustration broke through his calm facade. Do you ever stop assuming the worst of me? When you stop earning it. He exhaled hard and ran a hand through his hair. Listen. I looked into the metadata. The signatures, the timestamps, they were spliced. Whoever's behind this has access to the company's root archives. That's not something a random hacker could pull off. Helena's pulse quickened. Victor. Adrian looked up sharply. Your uncle. She nodded, bitterness rising in her throat. He was my grandfather's advisor. He arranged your appointment after the funeral. Said it was what grandfather wanted. But all along, he was siphoning money out of the company he swore to protect. Then why involve you? Because if the audit finds my digital signature on those accounts, I'm finished. I'm the perfect scapegoat, the hidden heiress turned corporate fraud. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city buzzed faintly beyond the glass, indifferent to the crisis unfolding above it. Finally, Adrian said quietly, then we're on the same side now. Helena blinked. Excuse me. You think I'm going to let Victor Vale burn the company? My company, just to destroy you? Not a chance. His eyes hardened. If we're going to stop him, we'll need to work together. She wanted to reject him, to remind him of all the ways he'd belittled her. But the truth was brutal. She couldn't do this alone. Victor had connections in every corner of the corporation, maybe even on the board. Fine, she said finally. But this doesn't make us partners. This is temporary. A faint smirk touched his lips. Temporary is fine. I just need you to trust me long enough to catch your uncle. Helena shot him a look. Trust, Adrian, is not something you earn in a day. No, he said softly. But maybe we can start with one. That night, as the two of them reviewed documents side by side, the tension between them shifted. It wasn't quite hostility anymore. It was something electric, the kind of energy born when two powerful forces stop colliding and start aligning. For the first time since she'd taken her grandfather's throne, Helena wasn't sure who she was fighting for anymore. Or against. For the first time in months, Helena's office lights burned long past midnight, and she wasn't alone. Adrian sat across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, leaning over a series of old audit reports. The tension that had once defined their every interaction now felt different. Still taut, but threaded with reluctant respect. They had spent hours piecing together the puzzle of Project Seraph, connecting shell companies, cross-referencing encrypted ledgers, and tracking years of missing funds. It was tedious work, but both were too stubborn to quit. At some point, the silence between them shifted from hostile to companionable. Here, Adrian said suddenly, sliding a folder across the desk. This account, see the routing code? It loops back to Vale Holdings. That's your uncle's private trust. Helena scanned the document, her pulse quickening. He's been diverting pension funds from employees. Adrian's voice hardened. Thousands of them. That's why the numbers never balanced. Helena pushed back her chair, pacing to the window. Below, Aurelia's skyline shimmered like a constellation of lies. He's using my name to cover it all. If this leaks, he wins, Adrian finished for her. She nodded, jaw tight. And Rothan Vale collapses. Adrian watched her, the way her composure cracked only when no one else was looking. The determined woman who'd walked into his boardroom 2 weeks ago was still there, but now he saw the weight she carried behind the mask. You don't have to do this alone, he said quietly. Helena turned, eyes sharp. I've been doing everything alone since the day my grandfather died. He stood, matching her intensity. Maybe that's the problem. Something flickered in her expression. Hurt, defiance, maybe both. You think I want to be alone? Every time I've trusted someone, they've used it against me. Including you. Adrian didn't flinch. You're right. I did. I was arrogant and blind. But I'm not the same man you worked for 3 years ago. Helena let out a bitter laugh. People like you don't change, Adrian. You just adapt. Then let me adapt to doing the right thing. That stopped her. She looked at him for a long moment, the walls around her beginning to tremble. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't manipulating. For once, he was simply being honest. Why? She asked softly. Why help me now? His answer came after a pause that felt like forever. Because when you walked into that boardroom and took everything I thought defined me, I realized I respected you more than I've ever respected anyone. Her breath caught. She turned away before he could see the confusion in her eyes. They went back to work, but the air between them had changed. Each accidental brush of hands across the desk felt charged. Every glance lingered too long. By dawn, they had mapped the entire financial trail. It led to a network of front companies in Asteria, a small offshore hub run by a man named Jensen Moreau, Victor's longtime associate. This is our proof, Helena said, tapping the final page. We take this to the board, and Victor's finished. Adrian frowned. Not yet. If we move too soon, he'll bury the evidence and spin it back on you. We need something undeniable. She sighed. You mean dangerous? He met her gaze. You didn't get this far by being careful. A slow, reluctant smile touched her lips. You really have been paying attention. Adrian's tone softened. Always. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Later, when Helena finally dismissed him, she stood alone in her office, staring out at the rising sun. Her reflection in the glass looked stronger, sharper, but lonelier too. She thought about what he'd said, about not doing this alone. The idea scared her more than the threat of her uncle's schemes. Because if she let Adrian in, even a little, she might start to remember the man she once admired beneath all the arrogance and mistakes. And she couldn't afford to feel that way again. Not when the next move could destroy them both. By the time the board convened that Friday morning, tension hung over Rothan Vale like a storm cloud ready to burst. The news had already leaked. Helena arrived to find the media clustered outside the glass tower, cameras flashing, reporters shouting her name, Helena Vale. Did you embezzle company funds? Did you falsify your inheritance? The rumors spread like wildfire across Aurelia City. Someone had sent anonymous tips to every major financial paper, claiming Helena had siphoned millions from the company into offshore accounts under her own alias. It was Project Seraph, twisted and turned against her. Inside the building, whispers followed her every step. Adrian was already in the boardroom, pacing like a caged wolf. They're moving faster than we thought, he said as she entered. The board called an emergency hearing. Victor's here too. Helena froze. His what? Before Adrian could answer, the door opened, and Victor Vale stepped in, immaculate in a charcoal suit, silver hair gleaming under the lights. His smile was that of a man who had already won. Niece, he said warmly, as if greeting her for tea. What a mess you've made. Helena's voice was sharp. You did this. You framed me. Victor's chuckle was low, smooth. Such an accusation. And yet, all the evidence points to you. Financial transfers, encrypted authorizations, falsified audits. It's tragic, really. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some couldn't meet Helena's eyes. Others looked ready to condemn her. Adrian stepped forward. Enough, Victor. We know about Seraph. We have the files. Do you? Victor asked, turning to him with a faint smirk. Because I seem to recall you were the one who approved those R&D budgets 3 years ago. Under your name. Surely you didn't forget. The words landed like a blow. Adrian's eyes widened. That's not. Those weren't my authorizations. Oh, but they are, Victor interrupted. And the audit trails will show that. Which means either you're complicit, or you're covering for her. Gasps rippled across the table. Helena's throat went dry. She could see the trap closing in around both of them. Victor leaned back, folding his hands. So, dear Helena, which is it? The prodigal heiress turned criminal? Or the disgraced CEO who conspired with her? Adrian's mind raced. He could deny everything, throw Helena under the bus, and keep his empire intact, or he could tell the truth, and go down with her. Helena looked at him then, not with expectation, but resignation. She knew what self-preservation looked like. She'd seen it in everyone she'd ever trusted. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he stepped closer to the table and spoke, voice steady. It was me. The room went silent. Victor's smile faltered. What? Adrian repeated it, louder. The transfers. The authorizations. I did them. Helena found out and tried to stop me. Helena's breath caught. Adrian. He didn't look at her. You want someone to blame, Victor? Fine. Blame me. I'll resign effective immediately. The board erupted into chaos. Reporters outside would have their headlines by noon. Adrian Roth, the Golden CEO, fallen from grace. Victor stared at him, caught off guard. You'd ruin yourself to protect her. Adrian's voice dropped. I'd rather destroy myself than let you win. He turned to Helena at last, eyes full of the truth he'd never said aloud. Finish what you started. Fix the company. And then he walked out. By the time Helena reached the lobby, security was escorting him toward the exit. Cameras flashed as he passed through the glass doors, calm, composed, every inch the martyr of a scandal he didn't commit. Helena wanted to stop him, to tell him not to do this, but the words died in her throat. He didn't look back. Inside her office hours later, she found a sealed envelope on her desk. Her name written in his handwriting. For once, I did something right. Don't let him win. A. Her hands trembled as she held it. Somewhere between vengeance and redemption, Adrian Roth had chosen her. And she realized, with quiet dread, that she wasn't sure she could live with that kind of loyalty. Not from the man she had once sworn to hate. Outside, Victor watched the news from his limousine, satisfied. He thought he had won. But on Helena's desk, the encrypted drive Adrian had left behind began to flicker with life, decoding line by line. Hidden beneath the financial data, a single folder emerged. Project Seraph, True Files. And inside it, proof that Victor Vale wasn't just stealing money. He was funding something far worse. Helena sat alone in the dark, the only light coming from the laptop on her desk. The file Adrian had left her was still decrypting, line by line, her pulse syncing with the rhythmic flicker of the progress bar. When it finally opened, she understood why he'd risked everything. Project Seraph wasn't about money at all. It was a program, a covert development scheme using Roth and Vale's tech division to build military surveillance systems for authoritarian governments, disguised as data security solutions. Victor had laundered the contracts through dummy research budgets, pocketing his share while selling private citizen data overseas. Her grandfather's company, the legacy she'd sworn to protect, had been turned into a weapon for oppression. Helena stared at the screen until her vision blurred. If this ever went public, it would annihilate the company. The stock would collapse, employees would lose their jobs, thousands of families would suffer. But if she buried it, Victor would stay free. And Adrian's sacrifice would mean nothing. She picked up her phone and dialed the only number she shouldn't. He answered on the second ring. Helena. His voice was quiet, rougher than she remembered. You shouldn't call me. They're monitoring everything. I know, she said. But I found it. The real Seraph. Victor's not just stealing, he's selling surveillance tech to regimes. I can prove it. A pause. Then, softly, you can't expose that without burning the company down. Then it burns. Helena. No, she interrupted. He used my name, my family's legacy. He doesn't get to walk away clean. Not this time. Silence hummed between them. When Adrian finally spoke, his words carried a weary admiration. You sound like your grandfather. Maybe I finally understand him, she murmured. Power isn't about control. It's about conscience. The next morning, she summoned the board for one final meeting. Victor arrived smug and polished, certain the scandal had finished her. She began without preamble. Gentlemen, I have something to show you. The projector flickered to life, displaying pages of data, contract codes, payment trails, foreign transfers. Gasps echoed around the table as the truth unfolded. Victor's smile faltered. You have no proof those aren't fabricated. Helena hit a key. A video played, Adrian's recorded confession, time to release that morning. My name is Adrian Roth, his voice said through the speakers. I resigned to protect the woman who tried to save this company. But the real traitor is Victor Vale. Every transaction, every shell company, every order for Project Seraph, all signed under his authority. This is the truth. The room erupted. The legal chief bolted to call authorities. Reporters outside would receive the same footage within minutes. Victor lunged across the table, face twisted. You think this clears you? You'll destroy everything. Helena met his glare evenly. No, uncle. I'll rebuild what you destroyed. But first, you're done. Security entered, flanking him as he shouted protests that no one believed anymore. When the door closed behind him, Helena finally exhaled. The empire her grandfather built had survived, scarred, but alive. Later that evening, she stood on the roof of the building, the wind sharp against her skin. The city sprawled beneath her, dazzling and imperfect, like the truth itself. A familiar voice broke the quiet. "You always did like the view from up here." She turned. Adrian leaned against the railing, a small smile ghosting his lips. "They dropped the charges," he said. "Public confession, combined with the data you leaked, made me look more like a whistleblower than a criminal." "You were one," she said softly. "Even if you didn't plan it that way." He chuckled. "You saved the company. We saved it." For a while, they stood in silence, the wind tugging at their coats. The chaos of the past weeks felt distant now, as if the city itself had exhaled. "Finally," Helena said, "I'm stepping down after the restructuring. I'll hand leadership to the ethics board. No more dynasties." Adrian looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You're giving it up?" "I never wanted a throne," she admitted. "I just wanted to know it was worth fighting for." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you won." She smiled faintly. "Winning isn't the point anymore." He tilted his head. "Then what is?" Helena turned toward the skyline. "Making sure power ends up where it belongs, with people who'll question it." Adrian stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing but not disappearing. "And you? What happens to you now?" "I start over," she said. "Maybe I finally live for myself." He hesitated, then held out his hand. "Then maybe we both do." She looked at it for a heartbeat, the hand of the man who'd once fired her, then saved her. Slowly, she took it. No promises. No fairy tales. Just two people standing at the edge of a city they'd nearly destroyed, holding on long enough to face whatever came next. Weeks later, Aurelia's news feeds buzzed with headlines. Roth and Vale announces new ethical foundation, led by former heiress Helena Vale and ex-CEO Adrian Roth. "Rebuilding from within," said Vale. "Because power means nothing without accountability." Some called them idealists. Others, survivors. Helena didn't care what they called her. She'd learned the truth her grandfather had tried to teach her. That the greatest test of power isn't how fiercely you hold it, but how willingly you let it go. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more original novel stories. And stay tuned, our next story is coming soon.